Welcome to this edition of Fuel for Thought. I'm Kristen Balasia, Vice President of Consulting Services at IHS Markit, now S&P Global. We're proud to announce that earlier this month, we completed our merger, making the automotive team at IHS Markit, along with automotiveMastermind and Carfax, a new division within S&P Global called S&P Global Mobility. So this is the last time you'll hear me say IHS Markit on a Fuel for Thought. I will now be proudly saying S&P Global Mobility. So, in other exciting news and changes going on, big conferences are coming back and in a big way. NADA was held in Las Vegas last week and had fantastic turnout. We're going to be talking today about EVs, certainly a big topic at NADA, EVs and also digitization or online retailing as it affects brands, and of course, pretty significantly how it impacts dealers and the retail side of the business. So we will be talking to Treffen White, Director of Consulting Services at S&P Global Mobility.
Hi, Kristen. Nice to be with you today.
Thanks. And Chris Potgieter, Product Marketing Manager with automotiveMastermind, also S&P Global Mobility.
Hi, Kristen. Hi, Treffen. Good to join you both.
Great to have you guys, and it was great to see you in person, live and in person in 3D in Las Vegas. Did you guys have a good time?
I sure did. I mean, I wasn't used to standing and walking around as much, so definitely took a toll on my feet, but it was fantastic seeing everyone in person, catching up with folks that are new from the industry, and obviously meeting a bunch of new faces as well.
Yeah, it was great. It was great to see some old colleagues, but I must admit I'm still recovering from the secondhand smoke. I wasn't used to that in Vegas for sure.
Absolutely. Vegas is always an interesting place. So let's start with you, Treffen. You've been in the industry for a while and you've certainly seen changes. We've all seen some changes, but talk a little bit about how this EV transition in particular is going to require, and we're already seeing what it's driving more significantly across the retail side of the business.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to, kind of perspective, short-term versus long-term. And what you're seeing is a lot of excitement. Obviously, OEMs are announcing big investments, future investments in transitioning their product portfolios. But what dealers still see on a day-to-day basis is, the traditional internal combustion engine customer. Even with some of the growth that we expect over the next 5 to 10 years, we expect the average franchise dealer to still be selling the majority of their sales, in fact, 70%, still internal combustion engine vehicles by 2030. And their vehicles in operation, so from a service perspective, are going to be over 80% still internal combustion engine. So the challenge is for OEMs to really get that investment and commitment from a dealer perspective that is still thinking about this month's sales or kind of where they're going to end the year from a profitability standpoint. I really liken it to the challenge that OEMs have traditionally had with getting dealers to invest in facilities, which is obviously a much longer term decision. So that's going to be really the complexity and the challenge. And obviously these topics from a product standpoint are much more complex than any other product that they've had to deal with in the past. It's no longer just the product. They have to get sales training and understanding the complete ecosystem and explaining to customers, charging considerations, overcoming range anxiety, all those new topics that traditional salespeople have no experience working with. And obviously Tesla has captured kind of that low-hanging fruit of early adopters, people who are excited about the technology. Now we have franchise dealers who are going to be tasked with actually selling EVs and trying to overcome some of those early consideration sales objections that some of these customers are going to have.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned investment and you mentioned growth. So when we look at, you said the kind of sales split out in 2030, but there's also going to be 10 times as many EV models for the US consumer to choose from in 2030 as there is today. And Chris, why don't you talk a bit about the forecast and the growth that we're expecting, and how that's going to unfold over the next several years?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like Treffen just mentioned, I mean, huge growth over the next coming years. There's going to be a lot of new models coming into the market. At the end of last year, EVs accounted for about 10% of total new vehicle sales in the US. This year, we expect that to increase by about 5 percentage points, so end the year at about 15%. And then by 2025, which is literally just around the corner, that number is going to double to over 30%. So huge growth in the area. Still not the majority of vehicles sold, but you're going to have a lot of new models coming into market this year from the likes of BMW, like the iX and the i4. They ran a strong, really cool Super Bowl ad earlier this year on that. Audi has the e-tron Q4 model, Ford with the F-150 Lightning, and really competitive products as well from Kia and Hyundai. So I think a lot of new entrants and quite different model offers as well. When you think about the consumer of a Ford F-150 versus a BMW iX, these are two different consumers, but a lot to look forward to. And I think, when we talk about EV growth, of course, there's different types of EVs as well between battery electric, plug-in hybrid, and the conventional hybrid vehicle. But the majority of this growth is going to come from the battery electric or BEV segment.
Absolutely. And then you talk about all those new models and the growth. Treffen, how is this rolling out, and what are brands aiming to do to differentiate themselves? Obviously, they're bringing a new, very different type of vehicle to the market, but what else are they doing?
Yeah, I think to Chris's point, I mean, you're going to see every brand, every segment now have an EV offering over the next several years. And I think what that allows brands to think about are other aspects of kind of the customer experience. It all starts with the purchase process, and we know everybody's trying to move to kind of a digital transaction experience, a la Tesla. And I think the introduction of these EV models is something that brands are looking to take advantage of. Obviously, if a customer is going down the EV path, especially short term, they are open to new technology, new experiences, and so they have that opportunity to launch kind of a new purchase experience. Additionally, with the vehicle, they have the opportunity to introduce over-the-air updates and different connected services, and we know services will be a revenue source that brands are looking to capture over the coming years. And finally, I would say how they can differentiate themselves is kind of overcoming this range anxiety, charging infrastructure question that most customers will have. Tesla's done a great job of having kind of a dedicated charging infrastructure for their customers. And I think the brands that are able to connect to an infrastructure that makes their customers feel confident that they can drive where they need to, whether it's to work or even on vacation, that'll be a big differentiator.
So, Chris, let's talk a little bit more about what Treffen was saying there. I think that was a good segue. So they're investing, they're looking to differentiate, add services both at the the OEM brand and dealer level. And we did a study some time ago, and then refreshed it, that looked at consumers and their openness to the idea of purchasing an EV. In 2019, it was about 41%, and today that number's double. So over 80% of customers surveyed said they're open to the idea of an EV. So how can a dealer in particular find those customers most likely to purchase, or most open to purchasing an EV, and then convert more of those to actual buyers?
Yeah, great question. I think like dealers and marketers, whether it be us at automotiveMastermind or another marketing agency, we need to consider the context in which those customers are actually going to be using the product. I think up until now, too often marketers have kind of targeted an audience based on attributes like demographics, so age, gender, income. Just as an example, me being a 36-year-old male with a certain level of income doesn't mean, when I order food, it's just from Domino's Pizza. Sure, I will if me and my
That's a good thing.
Sure, me and my team will do that if we do pull in an all-nighter to complete a project by a certain deadline. But at the same time, I'm also, a fine dining consumer, when celebrating an anniversary with my wife. So you can see how context really does play an important role with that consumer's decision. When it comes to targeting, we're going to be looking to identify, factors that influence the consumer's likelihood to purchase. Together with S&P Global, I mean, we have hundreds of thousands of data points that create that lens into the context of consumers' like life and situation, like, which vehicle they're currently driving, what is the contract term, what type of deal are they in, is it finance, cash, is it lease, what does their vehicle history look like, trade-in values, registration, geographic data. I mean, you name it, we've got that data. And I think as we move now into the EV space, we're going to be looking at adding additional data assets to what we use. So, things like, are they a homeowner? That's a really important role as it relates to charging infrastructure. Do they have access to off-street parking? They need to be able to get home and plug their car in overnight so it's ready for them and has a good sufficient level of state of charge when they wake up in the morning. What type of federal and state incentives are available to that customer, because that often overcomes some of the purchase barriers, like that premium that's placed on the EV due to the technology. OEM first-party data like charging times, range, battery sizes, all of these play a really important role when identifying who the right EV buyer is and who is also not an EV buyer. So we'll be looking to use these types of data to extract meaningful insights and identify the right consumers to market to. And I think, understanding that is going to be key to the marketing and identifying at a dealer level who to sell to in the future with EVs.
Mm-hmm. And the broader capabilities of an organization to meet a new customer type. So Treffen, I know we mentioned early on kind of online or digital capabilities. And if we look at our data today, which, it's a small data set when we look at EVs over the last several years, and it's pretty narrowly focused around, one OEM. But when you look at that, we see that the EV buyer of today tends to be younger, more tech savvy, really leaning towards Gen X and millennials. And that's, by the way, it sounds like a pretty attractive customer to have. And with EV and digital going hand in hand, what are some of the things that should be kind of considered in a digital plan or an end-to-end online experience that OEMs and brands and dealers should be thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, building off of Chris's comments about identifying the EV customer, we've done actually a lot of work in profiling kind of who the EV customer is today to try and help brands think about who their EV customers of tomorrow are going to be as they launch new vehicles. And we definitely are kind of finding the EV customer looks a lot different in terms of demographics, psychographics, kind of what they value. And so it's really important for brands to think about kind of that loyalty opportunity to kind of stem the outflow of customers to a brand like Tesla. I think most brands are being impacted by Tesla's emergence in the space. And so figuring out kind of what that customer looks like and communicating with that customer in kind of the right way. We're a lot of times when we're talking with customers about our OEM customers in terms of EV launches and their goals, is this a loyalty play? Is it a conquest play? Obviously, the right answer is it's both. It's always both. But then you need to come up with a clear strategy on how you're going to target those loyal customers, the customers you want to keep within the brand, and which vehicles should you go after in terms of getting conquest opportunities, maybe from competing ICE vehicles even that are migrating to EV models disproportionately. Those become really good targets to go after in trying to optimize your volume opportunity.
Absolutely. And our loyalty data shows really year over year that customers that service with a dealer are more loyal. And so dealers are going to have to figure out a way to still engage with customers, and maybe in more fun ways, to be honest. I don't know too many people that are excited to go to their dealer to get an issue serviced or a recall service, but it is a touch point, right? It is an opportunity to engage and kind of build that relationship with your customers. And not that there'll be no service opportunities, certainly, but likely a few less. So final question, Chris and Treffen, if you were a dealer in this situation, what would your top couple of focus areas be to be successful through this EV transition?
I think maybe if I can start, Treffen, just for one thought that comes to mind. I think the most important thing right now is, identifying the fact that we're at a very early stage in terms of electrification of the industry. I think it's important just to start, and by that I mean, like you were just talking about, Kristen, service drive is a huge opportunity for dealers today. They're going to be having customers, 80, 100 repair orders complete in a single day, and out of that customer base is going to be a percentage of those buyers, which would make great EV prospects. So, why not take advantage of those customers coming through the service drive? With most brands nowadays, if a job takes more than a couple of hours, they're providing some type of service loaner. Expose a customer to what life is like with an electric vehicle, and maybe put them into either plug-in hybrid model or electric vehicle, and make sure that they set up for success with pointing out where the local charger is, making sure that they experience that vehicle for 48 hours and just understand what life is like with driving an electric vehicle. And I think for most of those customers, they're going to walk away with a really positive experience around the convenience of driving electric vehicles, the instant acceleration and torque that you get from it. And maybe they'll even realize, that maybe what they thought was kind of a scary idea of, where do I go to for a charge is really not that challenging. So, I think that for me, it's just about getting to know who your customers are, depending on which model you're selling, and starting to develop a portfolio. So that can only that's a good baseline to grow from going forward in the future years.
Great. Treffen?
Yeah, I think the key word for me from a dealer perspective is really prioritizing training. And some dealers kind of have the philosophy that training's a priority anyway. Some have a harder time with that, but OEMs are going to be launching tons of training programs, whether it's at live in-person training for a launch of a new vehicle or continuous learning digital opportunities. Embrace that training, take advantage of everything that OEMs are doing, and do some innovative things on your own. I would also say, different OEMs are thinking about different approaches depending on kind of how quickly they're transitioning, but they, in some cases, are trying to identify maybe an EV expert at the dealer. That's okay to a certain extent, but I think it needs to be much broader. I think everybody who's touching a customer at the retail level at the dealership needs to have a base level knowledge about EVs and the transition to EVs and what that looks like. And so embrace those training opportunities. 5 years seems like a long time, but it's going to be here before we know it when some of these percentages really start accelerating. And if you can differentiate yourself as being kind of the local EV expert, that's going to make a big difference, and you're going to get a lot of incremental business from that approach.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both, Chris Potgieter and Treffen White, for joining us today. We'll be back with more Fuel for Thought next month. To opt into our newsletter that provides more information on this topic and others, visit ihsmarket.com/auto newsletter.